When you think about transparency in CTV, I would think about it a few different ways. I think first and foremost, there are some challenges as it relates to measuring, right? So remember in the CTV space, you are talking about a 55-inch, 65-inch TV in the living room. While we're really good at measuring devices and understanding which devices are tuned to what, really difficult to understand who's in front of those devices. So I think the first piece is that measurement challenge. How do we personify that viewership? How do we then put attributes on top of it so that we not only understand how many people and loosely who they are, but more interesting things about them. So I think that creates some challenges, right? And the concept of targeting in CTV, it's not, again, a person level device. It's a device usually in a living room. So it becomes a little bit tricky to understand person level targeting versus household level targeting. So I think that creates some challenges. And when you have bad data, that could lead to some, pretty poor ad experiences for consumers, which is never a good thing. Now, the other piece is really related to content in my mind. So in the CTV ecosystem, you have sort of this interesting blending where through, frankly, consumer habits, people watch a lot of different types of content in the CTV environment, right? Namely something like YouTube, right? Which has a lot of user-generated content. So now all of a sudden you've introduced a little bit more risk because not all of that content is necessarily curated, and there's a volume of that content that makes it really, really hard to understand exactly what the content's about. So that could create other brand safety issues. Now, in this industry, we've talked about premium for years, and I don't know that we've done a great job of defining that. Historically, people have said, well, it's got to be professionally produced and it's coming from big studios. That doesn't really hold water anymore. If you look at what Jimmy Donnelly, what Mr. Beast does, that is premium, right? When he produces a video for $4 or $5 million, like the Squid Game video that he produced, that's premium, certainly premium in my kids' eyes, right? So I think you have sort of this challenge of in this less curated environment, how do you figure out what content is safe for your brand and what content is the right place for your brand? So I always think about it on both those spectrums. On both those sort of ends of the spectrum. I don't think there's a good solve necessarily for each yet, but I do think things like AI and generative AI in terms of how we can scrub content and understand what that content really is a big sort of light at the end of that tunnel.
Well, I was hoping you could tell us what technology or solutions are out there that could solve this issue of, okay, I log in my name, but you don't know who else is in my living room watching CTV with me. So what do you do?
Yeah. And I've said this before, I actually think it's one of the biggest opportunities for measurement companies. I think part of the problem is measurement companies still think that their job is to count. And while in the linear environment, that was true. That was the primary thing that we needed. That was the value they created. In a CTV environment where I can perfectly count, I don't necessarily need them to count. But what I do need them to do is explain co-viewing, personification. So this concept of identity and householding information, right? How do we take devices, treat them back to people, treat them back to households, and then start to understand things like attention and engagement? That's the white space for measurement companies. And somebody's going to figure it out. I don't know that anyone's quite there yet. There's obviously lots of big names in the mix. But once a measurement company really rolls up their sleeves, invests resources in not just counting, but in sort of the co-viewing pieces, the personification pieces, I think that's going to start to solve some of those issues. And then on the content and brand safety side, I think AI will set us free. I know everybody talks about AI, but I really do think we're at a point now, just given the volume of that content, AI is one of the only technologies that I can see that can scrub that mass pile of both video and audio and start to lay some semblance of brand safety on top of it. Of course, probably with a heavy hand from humans still. The machines will not just rule the world.
Well, no, I'm glad you brought up brand safety and suitability and what could be done with CTV. I mean, you have a lot of platforms. You have streaming, you have broadcast, but what could be done to improve CTV's brand suitability in such a way that it is more similar to linear television, let's say?
Yeah, and look, I think it's a difficult question to figure out who has to solve it. I think there's a role for technology companies and measurement companies, like we discussed before, but it also, the brands and the agencies have to take some responsibility as well, right? When you're quote unquote like blind buying in an open exchange programmatic environment, I think that's where things can get dangerous, right? Because now you're solely reliant upon whatever metadata is available for that content, and that's not always that clean, right? So I still think the brands need to know what they're buying. And that's why I do think people talk about everything going biddable in open exchange. I don't know that I see that. I think that introduces sort of this laissez-faire, hands-off sort of approach, that all of a sudden you lose a lot of control, right? So it's still important for buyers to have relationships with publishers and with the media entities, even if they want to transact programmatically. I think it gives them a sort of some skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of that brand safety piece.
So is there a tension between viewability optimization and brand safety, and how do you navigate it? I mean, brands, they have their blacklists and that kind of thing, and sometimes, there are it excludes a lot of brands that should be out there.
Yeah, look, I think part of the challenge is when you think about your typical media mix, it all depends upon what you're prioritizing. And more too often than not, we've seen people chasing performance and efficiency. Now, that doesn't sound like a bad thing, but if you're just chasing low CPMs, now all of a sudden you're prioritizing some content that may not be suitable for your brand. And I think that's where things get in mix. So I do think there's some tension with that, particularly, if you were, again, just chasing oversimplified metrics, like simple conversion metrics, very simple pricing metrics, and you're not sort of taking a step back and evaluating the sort of the entire media buy. There's a lot more that should go into that.
Looking ahead, is there anything that you hope to see next year in CTV?
Yeah, look, I come back to the measurement piece. I'm really excited to see who's going to start to solve that problem in a big and scalable way. I think once we do that, this is just the tip of the iceberg. CTV viewership certainly expanded and blew up really, post-COVID, when I think you just had certainly a lot more viewership. And you have a lot more content there now, which is great. But again, the measurement piece is still lagging. I think that's the piece. Once people start to solve it, we're already seeing budgets move in a major way, but I think all of a sudden you're going to see them move in a much bigger way. And you're also going to see, I think, just a lot more overall effectiveness in that platform once we have better data and measurement.